There's something sitting in your kitchen right now, something you've probably eaten your entire life without ever questioning it. It's familiar, it's simple, it's even considered healthy. And that's exactly why it's so dangerous to misunderstand, because the biggest risks don't come from obvious junk food. They come from things you trust, things you believe are helping you. For most of your life, vegetables were the safest choice you could make. You were told to eat more of them, to build your meals around them, to trust them without hesitation, and for decades that advice made sense. Your body could handle variation, it could process nutrients efficiently, it could adapt quickly. But something changes after 60. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily, quietly. Your internal balance becomes more fragile. Your circulation responds differently. Your body no longer absorbs, filters, and regulates in the same way it once did. And this is where the misunderstanding begins. Because the foods themselves don't change. Spinach is still spinach, potatoes are still potatoes, but your body is no longer the same system processing them. And when the system changes, the outcome changes. What once supported you can begin to work against you, not in an obvious way, not immediately, but gradually, through patterns that build over time. What makes this especially concerning is how silent this process is. There's no clear warning, no sharp pain that forces you to stop. Everything feels normal, until it isn't. You go to sleep feeling fine, and by morning something is different. Your balance feels off. Your speech feels slower. Your body doesn't respond the way it should. And in many cases, people never connect it back to what they ate the day before, because it doesn't seem possible. But the reality is this: after a certain point, health is no longer about what is good or bad. It's about what is appropriate for your body right now. And when you don't adjust to that, even the most trusted habits can start creating problems you never expected. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing that consistency automatically means safety. If something has always been part of your routine, it feels reliable. It feels proven. You've eaten it for years, sometimes decades, without any obvious issues, so naturally you assume it must still be working in your favor. But the truth is, your body does not operate on memory. It operates on current conditions. And those conditions change over time, especially after 60. What once felt stable can become unpredictable, not because the food itself changed, but because your internal systems no longer respond the same way. Your blood vessels are not as flexible as they used to be. Your kidneys are not filtering with the same efficiency. Your liver is slower at processing both nutrients and medications. And most importantly, your blood itself begins to behave differently. It can thicken more easily, circulate less efficiently, and respond more dramatically to imbalances in sodium, sugar, and minerals. This is where the real risk begins, because these changes don't come with a clear signal. They don't force you to stop or adjust. They allow you to continue your routine while slowly shifting the outcome beneath the surface. And because the change is gradual, it feels like nothing is happening, until suddenly, something is. What makes this especially dangerous is the illusion of control. You believe you are doing everything right, eating vegetables, avoiding processed foods, following habits that have always been considered healthy. But without adjusting those habits to match how your body has changed, you may actually be creating conditions that work against you. Not intentionally, not obviously, but consistently. And consistency is what shapes the body over time. This is why understanding your current state matters more than relying on past habits. Because what protected you before may no longer do the same job today. And in some cases, it may do the opposite. Take leafy greens as an example. For most of your life, they were one of the safest and most recommended choices you could make. Rich in nutrients, easy to prepare, widely considered essential for heart and brain health, and in many ways, they still are. But what most people never consider is how certain compounds inside these foods interact with the medications and conditions that become more common with age. When you are younger, your body has more flexibility. It can compensate for fluctuations. It can maintain balance even when intake varies. But after 60, that margin becomes smaller. The system becomes more sensitive to change. And when certain nutrients are consumed in large amounts or in inconsistent patterns, they can begin to interfere with the delicate balance your body is trying to maintain. This is especially true for people who rely on medications that regulate blood thickness or circulation. The body depends on stability in those conditions. When that stability is disrupted, even slightly, the effects can build quietly over time. What makes this difficult to recognize is that nothing feels wrong at first. There is no immediate reaction, no clear sign that something is off. But internally, the system begins to shift. blood may become more prone to clotting, circulation may slow in certain areas, and because this happens gradually, it often goes unnoticed until the consequences become visible. This is why consistency matters more than quantity. It is not about removing healthy foods, but about understanding how they interact with your current state. Because once that interaction becomes unbalanced, the result is no longer predictable, and unpredictability is what creates risk. Another factor that becomes increasingly important over time is how your body handles pressure. Not emotional pressure, but physical pressure inside your blood vessels. As you age, those vessels naturally become less flexible. They don't expand and contract the way they once did. Instead, they become more rigid, more sensitive to changes in volume and flow. This means that even small increases in pressure can have a larger impact than they would have years ago. Foods that influence fluid retention, sodium levels, or vascular response begin to play a much bigger role in how your body maintains balance. What once felt like a minor fluctuation can now create a noticeable shift. And when these shifts happen repeatedly, they begin to affect the structure of the vessels themselves. Small areas of stress develop along the inner lining. The body responds by trying to repair those areas, but in doing so, it creates conditions where clots can begin to form. Not large ones at first, but small accumulations that build over time. What makes this especially concerning is that this process is completely silent. There is no sensation attached to it, no pain, no discomfort, nothing that signals you to stop. And because of that, the pattern continues. Day after day, the same inputs create the same responses, slowly shaping the environment inside your body. This is why awareness becomes more important than ever. Because once you understand how these small changes influence the system as a whole, you begin to see that the goal is not to avoid certain foods entirely, but to manage how they affect your body in its current state. One of the most underestimated triggers that begins to matter more after 60 is how your body handles fluid balance throughout the day and especially overnight. When you are younger, your body can correct small imbalances quickly. You lose fluid, you drink water, everything stabilizes without much effort. But over time, that regulation becomes less precise. The kidneys filter more slowly, the sensation of thirst becomes weaker, and the body can shift into dehydration without sending strong signals. What makes this dangerous is not just the lack of water, but how it changes the behavior of your blood. When fluid levels drop, your blood becomes more concentrated. It thickens, and thickened blood does not move as easily through narrow vessels, especially in the brain. Instead of flowing smoothly, it begins to slow, and in that slower movement, particles have more opportunity to interact, to cluster, to form the early stages of clotting. This process is not dramatic. It doesn't create immediate symptoms. It builds quietly, often during the night when you are not drinking water and your body is already in a more vulnerable state. Now combine that with foods that naturally encourage fluid loss or alter electrolyte balance, and the effect becomes more pronounced. What felt like a light, harmless evening snack can begin to influence how your entire system behaves while you sleep. And because this happens when you are at rest, you are not aware of the shift. By morning, the system has already adapted to a new state, one that may feel slightly off but not enough to trigger concern. This is how patterns develop, not through extreme events, but through small, repeated imbalances that slowly reshape how your body functions over time. Another area that becomes critical with age is how your body processes carbohydrates, even those that come from foods you have always considered healthy. The key issue is not the presence of carbohydrates themselves, but the speed at which they are converted into glucose and how long that glucose remains in your bloodstream. When you are younger, your body can respond quickly. Insulin is released efficiently, sugar is absorbed into cells, and balance is restored. But after 60, that response slows down. Glucose remains in the bloodstream longer, and each spike creates a stronger effect than it once did. What makes this especially important is how repeated spikes influence the inner lining of your blood vessels. Each time glucose rises sharply, it creates a small amount of stress on that lining. Over time, these small stresses accumulate. The surface of the vessel becomes less smooth, less flexible, and more prone to irritation. The body responds by trying to repair those areas, but in doing so, it creates tiny sites where clotting can begin. This is not something you feel. It does not create immediate discomfort, but it changes the environment inside your body in a way that increases risk over time. And when these spikes happen regularly, especially in the evening when your body is preparing for rest, the effect becomes more pronounced. Circulation slows, blood thickens slightly, and the combination creates conditions where clots are more likely to form. This is why understanding how your body responds to different types of carbohydrates becomes so important. Not all sources behave the same way, and not all portions are processed equally. The key is not elimination, but balance. Because once that balance is lost, the system begins to respond in ways that are no longer predictable. There is also an important connection between how your body handles minerals and how stable your circulation remains. Minerals such as sodium, potassium, and others play a constant role in regulating fluid movement, nerve signals, and vascular tone. When these elements are in balance, your system remains stable. Blood flows smoothly, pressure remains within a manageable range, and the body can respond to changes effectively. But when that balance shifts, even slightly, the effects begin to spread across multiple systems. Too much sodium can pull fluid into the bloodstream, increasing pressure and thickening the blood. Too little of certain balancing elements can reduce the body's ability to regulate that pressure. Over time, these imbalances create a pattern where your circulation becomes less predictable. What makes this especially important is that these changes are not always caused by obvious sources. They can come from everyday foods that contain hidden amounts of these elements, or from combinations that amplify their effect. And because the body adapts gradually, you may not notice the shift until it has already influenced your system. This is why awareness of balance becomes more important than focusing on individual nutrients in isolation. The body responds to the overall environment, not just one component. And when that environment becomes unbalanced, the effects are felt across the entire system, including the brain. There is also an important connection between how your body handles minerals and how stable your circulation remains. Minerals such as sodium, potassium, and others play a constant role in regulating fluid movement, nerve signals, and vascular tone. When these elements are in balance, your system remains stable. Blood flows smoothly, pressure remains within a manageable range, and the body can respond to changes effectively. But when that balance shifts, even slightly, the effects begin to spread across multiple systems. Too much sodium can pull fluid into the bloodstream, increasing pressure and thickening the blood. Too little of certain balancing elements can reduce the body's ability to regulate that pressure. Over time, these imbalances create a pattern where your circulation becomes less predictable. What makes this especially important is that these changes are not always caused by obvious sources. They can come from everyday foods that contain hidden amounts of these elements, or from combinations that amplify their effect. And because the body adapts gradually, you may not notice the shift until it has already influenced your system. This is why awareness of balance becomes more important than focusing on individual nutrients in isolation. The body responds to the overall environment, not just one component. And when that environment becomes unbalanced, the effects are felt across the entire system, including the brain. When you begin to look at your habits through this lens, you start to see connections that were not obvious before. Patterns that once seemed unrelated begin to make sense. A certain meal followed by a certain feeling. A routine that leads to a consistent response. These observations are valuable because they give you insight into how your body is reacting. And once you have that insight, you can begin to make adjustments that reduce stress on the system. Over time, these adjustments accumulate. Circulation becomes more stable. Energy becomes more consistent. And the small signals that once felt confusing begin to fade. What makes this process powerful is that it is based on awareness rather than restriction. You are not removing everything you enjoy. You are refining how you use it. And that refinement leads to better outcomes over time. The most important thing to understand is that your body is not failing you. It is adapting to the conditions it is given. When those conditions are balanced, the system works smoothly. When they are not, the body does its best to compensate. But compensation has limits. And when those limits are reached, symptoms begin to appear. The goal is not to wait for those symptoms, but to recognize the patterns that lead to them. By making small, consistent adjustments, you create a different environment inside your body, one where blood flows more freely, where pressure remains stable, and where the risk of imbalance is reduced. This is not about fear, it is about clarity. Understanding how your body has changed allows you to support it in a way that reflects its current needs. And when you do that, you give yourself the best chance to maintain not just your health, but your independence and quality of life over time.